And I think it was a very good meeting, and both sides got what they wanted, at least some of the important issues. But there's no question that rare earths have become an important issue for China in terms of a negotiating tool. And they're using very similar mechanisms as U.S. export controls. So there's an application, a verification process of who are they going to be sold to? Are they being used for military use? There's a certain amount of bureaucracy, which is pretty much what the U.S. has done. So yes, there's no question that rare earths have become a very important negotiating tool. The U.S. got that. President Trump achieved the rare earths purchasing and the export controls being suspended, as well as, importantly, soybean purchases. That's a big issue here in the U.S. Farmers are not happy. Farmers are a big constituent of President Trump. So it was very important for him to get that. Now, the details have to come to place. We have to see how quickly the purchases happen. We have to see how quickly rare earth exports to the U.S. happen. But at least the foundation has been agreed to. China, on the other hand, achieved a suspension reduction of port fees, as well as the fentanyl tariffs. There was a little bit of gamesmanship going on. The U.S. wanted China to commit to stronger enforcement of fentanyl precursors. China wanted the U.S. to reduce tariffs before they made a commitment, and it looks like they met in the middle, and they settled on 10%, which I think is good. The important thing that I saw is there seems to be a commitment by both presidents to make the relationship work. And I think at the end of the day, that may be just as important as any specific agreement.
Yeah, I mean, let's pick up on that, Secretary Gutierrez, because President Trump indicated that he would go to China in April, and he's talked about President Xi perhaps visiting the U.S. sometime after that, though not being specific about when. Do you think that that was quite an important announcement, an important gesture?
No question. No question. And the fact that they would announce it now, that they will be going in April, 6 months from now, I think that's extremely important. That commitment to the relationship and the fact that President Xi will go to the U.S., those are very, very important things. The market is going to love that. U.S. companies will love that. This is, very, very good news. Also interesting that Russian oil, China is beginning to reduce maritime purchases of Russian oil. That's a very big deal. That's something that I would have thought would be very difficult to achieve. So there looks like both sides are trying to give each other reasons to come closer. So that can only be good for China, U.S., and for the world.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to digress just for a moment on that oil question, because we're also hearing this from India, refiners beginning to talk about reducing their reliance and diversifying away from Russian oil as well. I think that's a very interesting story that's now been emerging in the last few weeks, in the last month, around the Russian oil question and the sanctions. Just as someone who would have been closely at one point, connected to the administration, what is your take on that? The fact that progress is being made in terms of the impact of sanctions and the message being sent, not just by the U.S., but by the EU as well.
Yeah, I think this is a very important achievement because typically third country sanctions don't work well, because you're essentially, applying extraterritorial sanctions on countries who don't like it. China doesn't like it. India doesn't like to be told what they can do and who they can do business with. So I find it fascinating that India appears to be moving in the direction of at least reducing or suspending or making some gestures that are going in the direction that the U.S. has asked for. And, it's also a reflection that U.S. and India trade is important. Now, the thing that will also be important in that discussion will be agricultural purchases. India has not agreed to that. That is a major issue for the U.S. Again, agricultural exports, that will play very well in the U.S. Politically and economically. And that's something that India is very sensitive in India. But there appears to be a desire to move forward, which I think is very good. A lot better than we were 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago.
Now, earlier you mentioned soybean. What is interesting there is details matter, right? So initially we had an announcement about soybean purchases. It came out before that meeting, but it seemed that those soybean purchases looked largely symbolic. They weren't vast in their nature. What kind of numbers do we really need to be thinking about? Because when it comes to the details of any agreement or anything that comes from these talks, we need for it to be of sort of a more substantive nature, don't we?
Yeah, you're right. The commitment is that China will buy 12.5 million tons from now to year end, 25 million next year. That's very important. But as you say, what is the actual plan and how will the execution work? You know, something that that was not discussed, and there hasn't really been a big announcement about it, is U.S. export controls on China. That is perhaps China's number one issue with the U.S. strategic issue. And that's been an issue forever. So that hasn't been discussed. I think in a sense, there may be just giving the U.S. some time to do this. This is a very intense political issue in the U.S. There are a lot of members of Congress, bipartisan, who don't like the idea of opening up more exports to China of the very high-end chips like NVIDIA's Blackwells. So I think that that's something that has not been announced, but it will continue to be sensitive. And China may be expecting that we're going to make progress in that regard. And, you know, those are the types of things that can delay purchases of soybean, can delay exports of rare earths. And, you know, it has to be solved. And that's why this 1 year pause is important. That's also something that China wanted, you know, to get away from this monthly threat of 100% tariffs. You know, it's hard to do business that way. And I think that was also an achievement of the meeting. But the cloud hanging over this, very importantly, will be U.S. export controls for high technology, especially chips, to China.